It is a beautiful day, and today I'm continuing this lecture series, and we're talking about personal growth, personal development, things of that nature, just in genre, if I could put it that way. And I want to start this morning talking about accountability with identity. And this is discussing the person who can do everything correctly, has great discipline, does everything the way they're supposed to, but yet still feel like a fraud. I mean, and there's a lot of things we could talk about there, and some of you may think, well, it's just sort of the way I am. I'm just that way. I just will never have confidence. It's not about confidence. So let me start this conversation this morning with the version of personal growth that everybody tries first, because they see this and they go, I want to do better, so I'm going to try something. I'm going to do something different. Because it makes so much sense when you can see it on quote paper. All right. I mean, you want to become a different kind of person, or you want to grow the person that you are. So you change what you do, right? Some people say, well, you need new habits, new routines, new systems that you can point to, you can measure. Here we go. And I mean, all in all, the logic feels almost airtight. Do the things that a healthy, free, and functional person does, and you do them long enough and they become rooted and embedded as you do them over and over again, and eventually you become the person you wanted to be. And that's not really the way things work. And here's what makes this approach so sticky in that. It actually works partly. I mean, it works in some sense from an observational standpoint. So I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that behavior doesn't matter, because, I mean, that would just be dishonest, and it would also be wrong. Habits do accumulate into something that looks like character. I mean, you practice a set of values long enough and you start to feel different. There's evidence behind this, okay? So I want to be careful with what I say next, because I'm not tearing down the behavioral approach. I'm telling you, it stops short of the finish line, and I even hate to use the word finish line because of that I don't believe there is one. Here's what this approach leaves out. It never asks the question, who is doing the behaving? And I lose sight of this sometimes, right? We all do. I mean, I've watched people build an entire architecture around, everything they do. And I've seen them build and build and build and build and build an identity on, and an architecture on top of an identity, rather, that that never really got touched. I mean, someone wearing the mask of the resume, or the resume mask is what I call it. I mean, this is the identity that's built around achievement and performance and production. This person can absolutely learn to rest and to be at peace. They can build a gratitude practice. They can talk about presence in ways that sound extremely convincing, because in the moment, it feels convincing. From the outside, it looks like the achievement dependency got resolved. I mean, sometimes it even feels that way from the inside for a few minutes at a time. And they can still be wearing the exact same mask they walked in with. But what they have is a more disciplined version of that mask. A mask that's so sophisticated that other people admire it. Maybe one that they admire about themselves. Still performing, just performing at a higher level. And this is the whole problem that I want to name today, and I'm calling it accountability without identity. Accountability without identity. And here's what I mean by that. A person can hold themselves to a behavioral standard with complete consistency. I mean, real discipline. A lot of you know what I'm talking about. You can follow through with everything. And someone can do that and still have a standard sitting on top of an identity that was never addressed. So the accountability is genuine, and I don't want to call that into question. The behavior is also genuine. I mean, the discipline it took to build the behavior is genuine. What's missing in this picture and in this practice is the connection between the behavior and the person underneath the behavior, because that person hasn't moved. Only the surface changed. The doing has changed. And a well-built surface, I mean, it can hold a lot of weight before you notice what it's sitting on. And I hear this described in a lot of different ways by the people who have never really had a way to speak about it. They say feeling like an imposter syndrome. I mean, we know the term, right? Some people describe it as running two versions of themselves at once. One that shows up and does everything right, and the one underneath is just watching, waiting to be found out or fall apart. I mean, this isn't a moral failure. And I don't think it's dishonesty in an ordinary sense. Nobody in this room that I'm talking about is lying to anyone. What's happening is more specific than that. It's a structural gap between the self that's doing the performing and the self that's actually running things. So in this space, you've built the habits, you've kept the commitments, you show up early, you follow through, you do the hard things that other people avoid. And somewhere underneath all of that, there is a quiet, persistent sense that you're still not quite there. That the version of you doing everything really isn't the same version of you that's actually in charge. And that's the feeling I want us to sit with for a minute in this discussion, because it's the doorway into everything else I want to say. Most people don't talk about this feeling out loud because it doesn't sound like a problem that's real from the outside. I mean, try explaining to someone that you're doing everything right and it doesn't feel like enough. And you can, you can watch their face, right? They either get this really puzzled look and they try to figure out what you're complaining about. What's your complaint? I mean, because from where they're standing, you look like you've got it all handled. So the feeling goes where? Underground. People manage it quietly, usually by doing more. Another degree, another certification, another commitment, another way to prove, another volunteer, another act of service. And mostly they're doing it to prove to themselves that the discomfort is a sign. It's just a sign that they haven't worked hard enough yet, rather than a sign that they're solving the wrong problem entirely. So I want to name that pattern clearly. It's one of the most common ways that this shows up. It's the fraudulence feeling gets interpreted as evidence that you need to try harder, so you add more behavior on top of behavior that was already carrying more weight than it was actually structurally built for. And it's a little like reinforcing a foundation by adding another floor to the building. The extra floor might look impressive. It does not solve the structural problem underneath it. And eventually, it just makes the problem harder to reach. This shows up differently depending on where your particular identity got built. For a lot of the men in this room, it shows up as achievement, the resume mask that I mentioned earlier. You know, the sense that your worth is only as current as your last accomplishment. What have you done for me lately? What have I proven to myself lately? For a lot of women in the room, I've noticed it shows up as often around in the same way, but it focuses really on caretaking, on availability, the identity built around being endlessly capable, endlessly available, the one everybody can lean on. Man, I don't even have time to sit down because if I do, everybody's going to be disappointed or everything's going to fall apart. Different mask, same architecture underneath it. Both of them can produce genuinely good behavior for years and years and years, and both can quietly starve at the same time. They can starve the person wearing them because the behavior was never allowed to simply be an expression. It was always the price of admission. And to be fair to the whole personal development industry, most of what gets sold to you is built for the behavior layer, because behavior is what's measurable, marketable, and easy to promise results around, so therefore it's what's profitable. I mean, 90-day challenges, habit trackers, morning routines. None of this stuff is bad. Some of it, honestly, is fairly useful and it can help you. But almost none of it was ever built to ask the question we're asking today, because that question doesn't fit neatly into a product. It doesn't resolve in 90 days. It asks you to go slower and look deeper than most of what probably anyone, especially any one of us, ever tried. I think about how this plays out in actuality. Think about it. Maybe you've built a career people respect. You've hit numbers people only talk about. And you wake up every morning running an internal checklist to prove you deserve the chair you're sitting in. Maybe you've done the work in your marriage. You show up, you listen, you say the right things at the right times, and there's still this bracing, this feeling of, oh, what's about to happen underneath it? Like you're managing the relationship instead of living inside of it. Maybe you've built a spiritual practice in your faith, prayer, meditation, study, community, whatever your version of that looks like, and it still feels like something you're doing rather than something you are. None of that means the practice was fake. I want to be really clear about that, because for a long time, I thought that my practices in life were fake. They weren't. A lot of people hear a message like that and they think the answer is to stop doing, stop trying it all, stop building the discipline, stop holding the standard. I mean, that's not the way that's not the message that I'm trying to say. That's not what I'm telling you. The problem was never the behavior. The problem is that the behavior got asked to do a job it could never do. Behavior can express an identity. Behavior cannot become one. You can act your way into a new habit, but you cannot generally, act your way into a new self. Not directly, not by sheer repetition alone. I spent a long stretch of my own life mistaking discipline for transformation, and I could hold a standard. I could be consistent. I built a version of myself that looked from every outside angle like someone who had figured it all out and held it all together. And there was a whole season where I genuinely believed the doing was the being, because nobody had ever handed me a framework that separated the two. It took a long time and a lot of unraveling to understand that the behavior that I was so proud of doing was sitting on top of an identity I had never gone back and discovered. That's the layer we're going to spend the rest of this time underneath. Not what you're doing, who is doing it. Because until that question gets answered, every habit you build, every standard you hold, every commitment you keep is going to be riding on top of whatever identity was already there before you started. Sometimes that's fine. Sometimes the identity underneath is already sound and the behavior is a clean expression of it. But for a lot of people right now, and I'd guess for most of you, there's a gap. And that gap is where the fraudulence lives. That gap is where I just don't feel like me. That gap is not evidence, though, that you're a fraud. It's evidence that you've built a life on a foundation nobody ever asked you to inspect. So here's where we're headed. We're going to look at what's underneath the behavior. I mean, what I mean when I talk about the identity beneath the identity, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what integrity actually is, because it's not what most people think. And we're going to talk about what it looks like when the source finally changes, when the doing stops being management and starts being expression. That's the whole arc of the rest of what we're going to talk about. So let's get to it. Maybe 2 more hours. I'm just kidding. Let me slow down here for a second. It's not going to be much longer, but let me slow down here for a second, because this next distinction is the center of everything I'm teaching right now. If you only remember one thing from this video, I want it to be this. Every behavior comes from somewhere. There's a source underneath it, a place that the action is emerging from in actuality, even when you can't see it or name it in the moment. And the question I want you asking constantly about your own life and about the people you love isn't what are they doing? It's where is that coming from? Let me make this concrete. Picture 2 people who are both, by any outside measure, honest. They're honest people. Person one tells the truth because telling the truth is simply who they are. It doesn't cost them anything to maintain. There's no internal negotiation happening, no weighing of consequences, no bracing for what honesty might cost them. It's just the shape that their character takes. Now, person two, who is also honest, also tells the truth every single time without fail. But they're doing it because they have a rule that they follow, or because they belong to a community that would notice if they didn't, or because they've learned through hard experience that dishonesty costs more than it saves. From the outside, you can't tell these two people apart. Same behavior, same outcome. Every single time you observe them, they tell the truth. But pull the accountability away from person two. Remove the community, remove the consequences, and put them somewhere nobody is watching and nothing is at stake. That's when you find out which one of them actually was being honest and which one was managing a behavior. The source only reveals itself under pressure or in private when nobody's keeping score. This is why I think most personal development work asks the wrong question. It asks, what are you doing differently? People say that all the time, and they're lost in the mix of constant productivity, a whole new mask, a whole new performance. What new habit did you build this month? I mean, what are you holding yourself accountable to? These sound great, and they do create some movement and changes. They're not bad questions. I ask versions of them of myself every day, but they're not the deepest questions. And if you stop there, you'll build an impressive life on a foundation you never really looked at and saw. The deeper question is, who is doing it? What identity is actually building these habits? And when you get down to your accountability itself, the standards that you hold to yourself to, I want you to ask where that holding is coming from. Is this an expression of something real in me? Some genuine care about the quality of my life or my marriage or my work or the people who depend on me? Or is it a performance of the identity of someone who takes their life seriously? Because I need to tell you something that trips a lot of people up the first time that they hear that. That second version, taking yourself seriously as a kind of identity project, is still a mask. It's a well-dressed mask, very fine mask, to be honest. It might be the most respectable mask in the whole collection of 10 that I've excavated. But it's still a version of you managing an image instead of living from a center. So here's what I've watched happen for people who actually do this work at the identity level instead of only the behavioral level. They stop needing any external accountability whatsoever. Any structure that they were externally accountable to, they don't need it the way they used to. It may still be present. It may still be important. It may still be inquired upon sometimes, but it's not a tether. It's not something that is part of the breath. And I want to be precise about why, because it's easy to misunderstand this part. It's not that they've graduated past accountability, like they're too evolved to need it. It's that the accountability moved on the inside. It's not the same thing as the constant internal monitoring a lot of people run now. The background audit that I talk about in my course, where some of you, you're always checking whether you're performing correctly, scanning the gap between how you're coming across and how you're supposed to be coming across. That's not internal accountability. That's the mask identity policing itself and running its own surveillance system. And it's exhausting precisely because it never stops. What I'm talking about is very, very different. It's real alignment between what you do and who you actually are, and that alignment is what makes the doing feel natural instead of enforced. When the standard is genuinely yours, holding it does not require the same kind of internal policing. You're not managing a gap because there is no gap. I hear this from people trying to describe what shifted for them, and almost nobody says, I became more disciplined. What they say is closer to this. The work that used to take discipline just feels different now. I mean, some of it may be hard, and I'm not telling you this becomes effortless. Because for most people it doesn't, not completely and not forever. But the difficulty changes the character. It stops being the difficulty of maintaining performance and starts being the ordinary difficulty of doing something well because you actually want to do it well. Those two kinds of hard feel different in the body, even when they look like the same thing from the outside. And that difference, as small as it sounds when I say it out loud, is the whole distance between performing a life and living one. The difference between dealing with anxiety and not having anxiety for almost 1,200 days. I don't think most people are lying about who they are. I think a lot of people are managing who they are so carefully and so competently and exhaustingly. They never have been given permission nor had the language to ask what's underneath the management. And that's the question that we're circling. Who's doing it and from what place? A lot of the accountability we run, that we run on, turns out, once you look closely, to really be an invisible contract. I mean, nobody wrote it down. Nobody negotiated the terms out loud, but somewhere back down the years that you agreed, hey, this is what I need to do. So you agreed to it. If I perform this way, if I perform this correctly, if I do this, I get to keep the approval, the belonging, the sense of safeness in this relationship or this room or this space or this community or this family. Break the terms of that contract, and the fear that shows up isn't really about the behavior. It's about what you're afraid happens to you and your standing if the behavior slips. That fear is a pretty reliable sign that you're looking at management, not identity. Identity doesn't need a contract. It's just there. Whether anyone's watching, whether there's terms or period, nothing, whatever. Doesn't matter. I spent almost 3 decades inside institutions built entirely around this kind of accountability. So I've watched this pattern up close more times than I can count. Communities built around shared values are powerful, and they can genuinely help someone build real character. I mean, I was trying to think of what I was going to say there. They can genuinely help someone build real character over time, but they can also become the invisible contract's favorite hiding place, because the community's provision and what they provide, the fact that they provide such a convincing substitute for the internal work, makes them powerful. You behave correctly, the community affirms you, and the affirmation feels enough like belonging that you stop asking whether the behavior would survive without an audience. I watch people build entire identities this way. Admirable ones, generous ones, disciplined ones that were almost entirely dependent on the room staying full and the room staying watching. Pull either one away and something in them would come apart, not because they're weak, but because the identity had never actually been built to stand on its own. And I don't say any of this to indict community or accountability structures themselves. I still believe in both. I'm saying the structure can only ever be scaffolding. Scaffolding is useful while something is being built. It becomes a problem the moment you mistake it for the building. I want to give you a few ordinary places to go looking for this in your own life, because it's not always obvious until you know where to check. Work is usually the easiest place to see it, because work rewards performance so directly and so visibly. Notice what happens inside of you on the days nobody's watching closely, the days you could coast a little and no one would know. Some of what you feel there is simply tired, and that's fine. Everybody gets tired, but some of it is diagnostic. Does the standard hold because it's yours, or does it hold because someone might be checking? Relationships are a harder place to see it because the stakes are higher and the performance is honestly a lot more polished. A lot of people can run a genuinely loving performance for years, all the right words, all the right gestures, but never once ask whether the love underneath it has actually been rebuilt or whether it's still running off the old programming. The version of you that learned somewhere early that love had to be earned through good behavior. If that's true for you, I want you to hear this gently. It doesn't mean that you don't love the people you love. It means part of how you're loving them is still being managed instead of simply expressed. That's worth knowing. It's a verdict. I mean, it's not a verdict. It's not a verdict on you. It's not a verdict on your character. It's just knowledge. It's just data. I want to say one more thing about this particular domain because it's the one I get asked about most. A lot of people, once they see this pattern, go looking for someone to blame for it, usually a parent, sometimes a whole family system. And I understand the impulse, and most of the time there's real truth underneath it. But blame tends to freeze the work right at the point where it could actually start moving. It's more useful to understand where the pattern came from without needing anyone to be the villain of the story. Most parents who raised children who learned love had to be earned were themselves raised by people who taught them the exact same lesson. Nobody built this on purpose. Everybody was doing the best that they could with the identity they had at the time, which is exactly the same grace I'd ask you to extend to yourself right now. I saw this most clearly during my years in ministry. 29 years where the accountability structures were some of the most sophisticated I've ever encountered, and also for some people, the most convincing hiding place. You can build a genuinely devoted spiritual life this way. Faithful. You can be faithful. You can be there. You can be a faithful friend. You can be faithful in your prayer. You can be faithful in attendance. You can be generous in your giving. You can be visible in your service and still be running the entire thing off the fear of what happens if you stop and not know it. And I don't say that to be cynical about faith. I say because it is one of the clearest examples I've personally watched of behavior looking identical from the outside while the source underneath it was completely different from one person to the next. And the hardest place to see this, though, is in the private moments. The ones nobody else ever sees. What you do with a mistake that nobody saw. What you do with a private failure that costs you nothing socially to hide. That's usually where the truest version of the accountability shows up, because that's where the invisible contract has the least leverage. If the standard holds there too, without an audience and without a cost for letting it slip, you're probably looking at something closer to identity than performance. So how do you start telling the difference in your own life going forward? You don't need a diagnostic. I've got dozens of those. You don't need a diagnostic, not at first. You just need to get honest about a few ordinary moments. Notice what happens in you when no one and nobody's going to know, no matter what. Notice what happens when the accountability disappears, when the person you're trying to impress isn't in the room, when the community that would notice isn't watching, when there's no cost of letting the standard slip. Do you slip? And more importantly, what's the texture of not slipping on the days that you don't? Does it feel like relief, like you're simply being who you are? Or does it feel like effort, like you're holding a line that wants to give way? I want to be honest with you about something. Most of us are a mixture. There are parts of your life where the identity underneath is already solid and the behavior is a clean, natural expression of it. And there are other parts, maybe the parts you're proudest of, maybe the parts other people compliment you on the most, where the behavior is beautifully built and the identity underneath it has never actually been touched or seen. Those are the places where the accountability without identity problem lives. And it almost never lives in the areas where you're obviously struggling. It lives in the areas where you look, by every outside measure, like you've got everything together. That's the harder thing to face, if I'm honest. It's much easier to notice a problem where the behavior is visibly falling apart. It's harder to go looking for a problem underneath behavior that's working. Nobody's asking you to fix your marriage if your marriage looks fine from the outside. Nobody's telling you to examine your work ethic if you're already the most reliable person in the building. But that's exactly where I want you looking today, because the gap between behavior and identity doesn't announce itself with a crisis. Sometimes it just sits there quietly for years, held up by discipline, until discipline alone is not enough to hold it anymore. That's the layer underneath the behavior. That's the question most frameworks never get around to asking. And it's the question we have to answer before we can talk honestly about integrity and what it actually means, which is where I want to go next. What does it mean? I mean, the word gets used all the time. And I mean, it's almost lost its edges. Yeah, I believe in integrity. It's on the value system of every person I know and every organization that I've ever been a part of. Most people hear integrity and think honesty. You got to keep your word. You got to do what you said you do. And integrity includes those things. Sure, right? But that's not the root of the word, and it's not what I mean when I use it in this word. Integrity means alignment. It's a structural word before it's a moral one. Something has integrity when its parts hold together as one coherent whole, when there's no seam between what's true on the inside and what shows up on the outside. A person with integrity in that older, deeper sense isn't someone who's simply following the rules. It's someone whose outer life is a genuine expression of their inner one. The behavior isn't managing the identity, it's coming from it. This is the piece that I want you to walk away with deeply today. A person with real integrity in this sense isn't trying to be good. Sit with that, please, for a second or two. If I could pause and just let there be dead air, I just can't. Because this sounds almost backwards, right? Trying implies effort aimed at closing a gap. And when the gap is genuinely closed, the trying stops being necessary. In the areas where someone has actually done this work, they're not straining toward goodness. They're simply expressing what's already true underneath in the parts of themselves that's actually been discovered. I want to be careful here. I'm not describing perfection. There is no such thing. Nobody I've ever worked with, myself included, has every domain of their life fully aligned. There are always places still under construction, patterns still worth examining, growth still waiting on the other side of more honesty. That's not a contradiction of what I'm teaching. It's the actual shape of the work. What changes isn't the presence of flaws. What changes is the relationship between the outer life. What changes is the relationship between the outer life and the inner life in the places where the work has actually landed. And here's something that I think gets misunderstood constantly, that alignment isn't something you achieve like a certification or a pathway. Oh, look at there, I've made it. It's not something you earn and hang on the wall. It's something you recognize. It's already there. It's what's left. That's what's left standing after the performance of goodness stops being necessary, because the thing that you were performing has finally become available to you directly. You're not acting like a generous person anymore. You have learned that you are someone that generosity moves through, and in that knowing, you have become someone that generosity lives through, and you don't have to rehearse it. Let me head off a misunderstanding here, because I've seen it trip people up. None of this means the goal is some flawless, frictionless version of yourself where every action flows out effortlessly and nothing is ever hard again. That's not integrity. That's a fantasy. And chasing that is just another way of performing. This time, performing the identity of someone who's already arrived. Real alignment still includes struggle. It still includes days where you don't want to do the right thing and you do it anyway. What changes isn't the presence of resistance. What changes is what the resistance is attached to. You can resist because part of you is tired and human and still be fundamentally aligned underneath the tiredness. That's different from resisting because the whole structure was never really yours to begin with. See the two? There's also a kind of grace built into this that I want to name, because people tend to hear me teach this and immediately start auditing themselves in every single place they fall short. And that's the wrong direction to take. That's the wrong pathway. Don't pull this into that ditch. The point isn't to go find every unaligned corner of your life, feel bad about it, and try to fix it. The point is to notice honestly and without punishment where the behavior is running ahead of the identity, and treat it as information and data instead of evidence against you. You didn't build those gaps on purpose. Most of us built them in many different epochs of our life a long, long time ago, usually in our childhood, usually as a reasonable response to whatever we needed to do to feel safe or stay loved or acceptable in the environment that we grew up in. The gap was intelligent. It's just outdated now. And this matters so deeply because so many people carry a quiet shame about needing to do this work at all. This is humanity. This is what it means to live as a person. Like some fully formed adult should already have this figured out, as if needing to rebuild and understand who you are and who the identity underneath you really is and your behavior as some kind of late arrival to something everyone else already has settled. Let me correct that. Nobody arrives already aligned. Alignment isn't the factory setting. Every one of us built our earliest identity out of whatever materials were available in childhood, usually without any say or sovereignty in the matter. Usually shaped by what got us love and safety and approval in a specific home with specific people in it. That identity did its job. It got you here. And the fact that parts of it now need to be examined and in places restructured isn't a mark against you. It's simply what it looks like to keep growing past the point where original materials stop being enough. So if you're sitting with some discomfort right now, some recognition of a gap you hadn't quite named before today, I don't want you carrying that as shame. I want you carrying it as important information. The same way you'd treat a diagnostic result from a doctor. It tells you where to look. It doesn't tell you anything about your worth. So let's get back to where we started so we can close. Because I think we can finally say something true about the behavioral approach that we couldn't say at the beginning. It's not wrong in what it produces. Habits do shape a life. Discipline does build something real over time. The behavioral approach isn't wrong in its results. It's misguided in its assumption. And the assumption is that enough repetition held long enough will eventually rewire the identity underneath it automatically just from the sheer weight of consistency. Sometimes that feels like it happens. But even if it does, it will not stand up. And it will not stand up here. It will not stand up under pressure. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you that it's not something that needs to happen or that it doesn't need to happen. I mean, there are people who acted their way. I'm trying to be careful what I say here. Let me just punt. There are people who acted their way into a genuine value long before they understood why. And eventually, the acting became the actual person. That path is real. I have 42 core values that I discovered were part of my real self. The way I expressed them and lived them was not from my real self, okay? The behavioral pathway is not reliable. And for most people, it's not the shortest distance between where they are and where they want to be. The direct path runs through the question we already asked. Who is doing the behaving? And that question doesn't get answered by adding another habit. It gets answered by going underneath the habit to the identity, actually generating, actually doing the work. And then we do the work there first at the root. And that's the whole shift I'm asking you to make today in your thinking. And it isn't a shift away from behavior. It matters. Behavior matters. And I never tell you to stop building the disciplines that hold your life together. But behavior stops being the primary lever. It becomes the evidence of work that already happened somewhere deeper. You build the identity first, or at least alongside the behavior in testing, aligning, and refining, instead of hoping the behavior builds it for you. That's the difference between managing a life for years and finally, honestly, actually living one. Here's what this looks like. I know this has been a long one today. Alignment can sound abstract until you see it up close. Picture the difference between someone who shows up for their family because showing up is required of a person like them, and someone who shows up because there's nowhere else they'd rather be. From across the room, you could not see the difference. Both of them are there. Both of them are present. Both of them are attentive, doing all the right things, but one of them is running a program and the other is just home. Ask either of them how it feels and you get a different answer, even if you can't tell from watching. Or picture two people who both give generously. One gives because generosity is part of who they are, the identity that they've uncovered and live, and the identity that they've, goodness, is part of the identity that they've built, and they think it's who they are. The identity of someone who's known for giving. Oh, that's a generous person. They have to keep that up. And in that, there's a quiet ledger running somewhere in the background, tracking whether the giving is being noticed or whether it's producing the reputation or whether their standard needs to be more. Maybe they need to give more. The other gives because withholding would feel like withholding from themselves, because the giving isn't separate from who they are in the first place. Same check written, same dollar amount, completely different act. This is why integrity, in the way I'm using the word, can't be measured only by watching what someone does. You have to get access to the source, and the only person who really ever has access to that person themselves. Which means this whole framework ultimately isn't something I can verify for you from up here. It's something only you can do, only something you can check. Only something you can experience in quiet, honest moments when nobody else is grading you. What do I ask myself? I'll tell you. It's simple and it's uncomfortable in exactly the right way. When I do the right thing, do I feel like I'm being who I am? Or do I feel like I'm succeeding at being who I'm supposed to be? What's the difference, some people ask? If I say I'm fast, there's probably no difference in most people's ears. But these are not identical questions. One is expression, the other is management, no matter how good the management has gotten. And if you're honest with yourself about that question today, in some parts of your life, the answer is going to be expression. And I want you to notice that and let it encourage you, because it means the work has already landed somewhere. And in other parts of your life, probably including some of the parts you're proudest of, the honest answer is going to be management. It's not a failure. It's just a map. It's an accurate map of where the identity work needs to happen. And now that you can see the map, we can look at what it actually looks like when the source starts changing. So what does it look like? That'll be tomorrow. I'll see you. This is James Tippins, Unbound, Freedom for Life.